How many wars is America fighting right now? 2, 3, or 0? Since 9/11, America has maintained military involvement in numerous countries around the world, in numerous capacities, all without a formal declaration of war from Congress. In fact, such a declaration hasn't been passed since 1942. So what constitutes a modern war? We examine the shifting definition of war today on The Professors.
From across the city and the 7 city colleges of Chicago, broadcasting from 63rd and Halsted at Kennedy King College. Professors take the art of conversation to a higher degree.
I'm Ted Williams from Kennedy King College. Joining me today are professors Rashid Carter from Harold Washington College, from Chicago State University, Akbar Dima, and Pamela Canamaray from Kennedy King College. Professors, welcome.
Thank you.
So, we're talking about declarations of war today. And we're talking about the fact that the last time the United States officially declared war was World War II. And yet we've been involved in a lot of military campaigns since then. We've been involved in Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan, etc. So the question we have today, and we're going to be getting into, is how does our nation define war, if you will? How do we declare war constitutionally and otherwise in terms of popular opinion? I'd like for someone to tackle that as a first kind of point of conversation.
Well, if I may take that first, war is an armed conflict, either between nations or within nations, as in civil wars. But there is an interesting scenario here with respect to the question you have posed. The Constitution of the United States, in Article 1, stipulates that the Congress has the power to declare war.
Sure.
So power to wage war is vested clearly in the people as represented by those they elect. Then Article 2 of the U.S. Constitution says that the president is the commander-in-chief.
Sure.
So you have 2 roles here that they have to play in terms of waging war. Since 1942, we had the situation in Vietnam where the U.S. waged a thoroughgoing war for 27 years with 55,000 people dead in this country and 1 million or more dead in Vietnam. That war was not declared. It's referred to in history books as a military action.
Sure.
So following that situation in 1973, the Congress passed a War Powers Resolution. And the War Powers Resolution essentially says the president can send troops in area of imminent danger for 60 days. And within 48 hours of sending these troops, he has to inform leaders of the Congress. And then he can extend that for another 30 days. But after 90 days, he has to seek formal approval or declaration of war to keep them there.
Sure. Sure.
So you understand from this standpoint that what Obama did in Libya, as we have seen, is in some way a violation of the War Powers Resolution.
Sure.
But we'll continue with this, and I'll have more remarks to make.
Very important point. I want to add to that definition of war, or sort of popular or otherwise, because I think that, you know, if you think about it, and I thank you very much for the information because it's very enlightening. The reality is, though, that public perception in politics is really as important as policy. And public perception is that America, I don't want to use the word arbitrarily, but I do want to use the word maybe frequently. Frequently engages itself in controversies, which, interestingly enough, teaching political science, I make my students read George Washington's farewell address. Okay. And in George Washington's farewell address, after he left office, he basically writes that the United States should not be involved in foreign controversies, that the United States should stay engaged economically with other countries, but when it comes to the political and military issues that are faced by other countries, the United States should have no permanent allegiances with these nations. I think that the appetite for foreign engagement foreign entanglement is a term that Washington uses, is very low right now. And if you look at this question of war and how we define war, the public, they're not buying it. And they're, I think, concerned with this notion of us going to war. Well, let's speak a little bit about that. I think it'd be a good place to talk a little about public perception about the United States military engagement.
I think there's suspicion that a lot of our engagement in war with other nations has to do with, what you just described, economic interests, right? Things that are not about, viable threats to the United States of America and its citizens, not direct threats in terms of being in imminent danger. It's more so, I think the perception is that there's a small cadre of politicians or individuals in the nation who have a hidden agenda, if you will, and that sort of pushes the impetus for war, as opposed to it being a groundswell of public opinion that then leads to, of course, our leadership deciding that they should engage for the best interests of the American citizenry. There seems to be a usurpation of the process in the favor of a minority of individuals who choose to engage, and it might not be arbitrary ways, but there might not be, again, ways that are defined in terms of this whole notion of imminent danger.
Sure. Now, speaking of that, I'd love to talk a little bit about the Iraq and Afghanistan conflicts, because I think those are conflicts that, President Bush did sort of go on a campaign, if you will, international campaign, when it came to the war in Iraq. The war in Afghanistan, if I'm not mistaken, there was an actual congressional vote taken where there was overwhelming support for the United States to go to war directly after 9/11. So are these measures enough to really convince the public, if you will, as you were saying, that we have an imminent danger? Because that was really the term that was used a lot.
Well, I think that's interesting in that you would bring up Colin Powell, because after the fact, we find that when they interviewed him after the 9/11 incident and declaring war on terrorism, that he actually made the recommendation to Bush to not attack in that area. And so in reflection, my perspective of war is totally different, because I'm looking at the young people who see that as an alternative for being able to attend college and receiving the benefits. And so the direction that I'm going with this whole public opinion of war is that we're losing the lives of our young people because they have no other options.
Sure. Very important point. I almost hate to bring this up, but we just had military recruiters here on our campus last week, and we had a spirited debate in our class about it. My students were given homework about this question because at the end of the day, I did not want to push an opinion on them about military recruiters, but I wanted them to think about this question about military recruiters in particular areas versus, say, corporate recruiters in those areas, because you don't see the corporate recruiters coming to those areas necessarily. And so the military and war is a big industry. It's a viable option for large numbers of people who do not have other choices, and yet at the same time, we still have security concerns. And so we have to balance that. And so we think about this in terms of, specifically our goal today is to talk about this in terms of presidential powers and how we engage ourselves in war. And so I would love for you guys to offer a thought on that, the frequency, that sort of thing.
Yeah, if I may go back to the point you made about Washington. Washington, the U.S. Government was fashioned after him. Hence, they have the commander-in-chief in the Constitution. And during his time, he would actually go and lead the troops, as he did after he became the president, to put down the Whiskey Rebellion. But today, our presidents do not go to war, so their own perspective of what happens in the war front and the difficulties is quite different. But then that was the era of isolationism. From Washington all the way to WYCC in 1917, the U.S. maintained an isolationist policy. From 1917 until now, the U.S. has become globalist, and the U.S. has fought over 200 wars. Right now, the U.S. is fighting, you may say, 3 wars. There is war going on in Afghanistan, there is war going on in Iraq, There is war going on with terrorism wherever they may be. Now, you may say the 20th century war is different from the one we are fighting. Previously, the war was waged against states. Presently, the war is waged against
an ideology.
organizations.
Yeah.
So the strategy of fighting wars in the 21st century is different. What has emerged lately in the Obama administration that we need to pinpoint is this. There is consistent and fierce targeting of individuals
Yes.
for killing.
Yes.
And with the death of Libya's Gaddafi, it seems to me that we are moving into a different trajectory in this war on terror.
Sure.
We are moving into this a different one because in 1976, President Ford, in an executive order number 11905, essentially outlawed political assassinations. And Jimmy Carter affirmed that in a different executive order, and even Reagan, in an executive order number 11333, outlawed foreign assassinations, even though in April of 1986, he was the first to send bombs to bomb Libya and in an effort to kill Gaddafi. So Gaddafi would have been killed in 1986 had Reagan succeeded.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, but that was because he was accused of being behind the bombing in discotheque in Berlin.
Let me actually ask you a question about that because you bring up a very, very important point. So now we don't fight wars in obviously traditional ways. We have drone attacks, and there are questions about whether drone attacks are declarations of war. We obviously impose sanctions, which may not be a wholesale war, but they have a significant impact on the population that's akin to war in terms of people dying and that sort of thing from starvation. And then you talk about this political assassination issue. And the argument is, and I've listened to this argument a lot, that this is a more humane way of fighting wars. Let's assassinate people. Let's target cars. We've blown up cars with leaders of Al Qaeda and that sort of thing. And you're saying that even though we do this and it's consistent and it's popular, and that's the other thing, these assassinations are very popular. They showed Secretary Clinton right after she found out about Gaddafi being killed, and there was kind of jubilation that kind of came across the screen. After Osama bin Laden was killed, we saw hundreds of students standing outside the White House as though we just won a Super Bowl, right?
That's right.
So they're popular. People say that they're better than sending large numbers of troops over there. But is this a good way to fight war?
I think that it's scary from a certain respect that it's almost like we're playing a video game, like one of those call to action games, right? Where you kind of sit back and you have someone else facilitating war and doing the killing. But as you alluded to earlier, if you're not out on the battlefield and you're not charged with the responsibility of taking a life or engaging in battle, then your perspective is going to be a lot different. And we have such a small number of individuals actually engaging in war activities. I mean, we as a nation, we don't really have an appreciation for the toll that these types of military actions take. And so my fear is that it conditions a certain lack of or insensitivity towards these sort of engagements. And you talked about the drone attacks. One of the things that makes drone attacks very popular is the fact that they're low cost, or relative to if you have to send actual human beings into combat, and then you don't have as many human lives lost. And so, from the public's perspective, that might be a good thing. But what that also might lead to is more attacks. And so, what is that objectification of life in general? What does that do to the consciousness of Americans and our support for war in the future?
Moreover, the problem is the drone technology is not a very complicated one indeed. So what happens if our enemies are able to also make their own versions of drones
very important point,
or other aircraft that are pilotless and can target people and kill them? It becomes very complicated. We are moving into an area that we don't quite understand in the quest to eliminate people we identify as terrorists. But we have to step back and think a little bit. What happens if other nations get a hold of the drone technology?
Very important.
Obama has just sent troops to